Hello, welcome to the Wildline Podcast. I'm your host, Dan. This is a podcast about movies and how much money they make at the box office. Today is going to be the weekend review show for the weekend of June 7th through the 9th, 2019. The numbers just came in this morning, so we will walk through the top 10, do some deeper dives on the two new wide releases, Secret Life of Pets 2 and Dark Phoenix, talk a little bit about some limited releases that are doing well, Late Night and The Last Black Man in San Francisco, and then we will review what's happening here for the rest of June at the box office. But let's get into this top 10. Things did not pop off this weekend. We are in the middle of the summer movie season, and this weekend was kind of depressing in terms of box office numbers. So Secret Life of Pets 2. So just to review, the original, it did $103 million its opening weekend, which I think really surprised a lot of people, especially me. I think it was right before I started the podcast. I think I started the podcast in like fall of 2016, and that was in July 2016. But Secret Life of Pets opened to 104, closed out at 368. I mean, a really kind of a magical run for a movie that's not really all that good. I've not heard anybody who's seen that movie say, "Hey, that was a great like Pixar level, Disney level classic." Animation film. I remember it was sort of like, yeah, whatever. Like, I guess there was nothing else out. It was like perfect timing, had an open runway to make a lot of cash, and that's what happened. So very good performance. So it didn't really seem that strange that they were going to do a sequel. Of course they're going to do a sequel. Secret Life of Pets probably made like $300 million, $250 in profit, how the check what Deadline said, but it made a ton of money just in profit. So Universal, of course, is going to make another one. So 3 years later, we have this new one. It has opened up in the number one slot. People thought there might have been a head-to-head between Secret Life of Pets 2 and Dark Phoenix, but Dark Phoenix, it's just, we'll talk about it in a second, but an unbelievable collapse. So Secret Life of Pets 2 did open up at $47.1 million for the weekend. In an absolutely massive wide release opening, 4,561 theaters for Secret Life of Pets 2. That's got to be in the top 5 releases all time. It might even be number 1. I'll have to check on that. Per theater average was $10K or 10,300 if you want to be exact. Total gross is actually $48 million, not $47. There was a preview showing of this, I think, a few weeks ago, so they're adding that into the total. But as you can tell, 47 opening here. The original was 103. 104. So this is an extreme underperformance, less than half of what the original made only 3 years ago. And so, is that like, we could do a quick postmortem about why in the hell did that happen? Well, before we dive into that part of it, let's take a look at the quality of the film and see if there's anything that we can pinpoint there as a reason why it's underperforming so much. Now, is it a flop, right? We'll talk about that in a bit, but like $80 million for the production budget, prints and advertising, just domestically alone, probably 40 to 50 million, maybe the 50 million range. So we'll see how that math plays out. But in terms of what people thought about the film, Rotten Tomatoes score from critics, 54% fresh score, which is rotten. Not good at all. Actual ratings of 57 out of 100. What I'm doing now is for any sort of score that I'm giving, I'm just making them all out of 100 because I think it's just easier to understand and compare between these different scores, because sometimes it's out of 5 stars, sometimes it's out of 100, sometimes it's a percentage. I'm just going to convert everything to out of 100. So the Rotten Tomatoes score is low, 54%, 57% actual score from critics. The verified audience score on Rotten Tomatoes, which I'm really loving, by the way. I'm just so glad that they decided to do this because it gives me another like direct data point that like is not perfect, but like I think it is very accurate. It's not perfect, but it's very accurate. So the verified audience score is on Rotten Tomatoes is you have to buy a ticket right now through Fandango. So Fandango ticket buyers for the movie are the only people that can rate it, which I think is really cool. They're going to expand that out a little bit, I think, to other movie theaters and stuff, but it's a good start. So that verified audience score from people who did actually buy tickets for Secret Life of Pets 2 was a 92%. With an actual score when they gave it a rating of 90 out of 100. Very strong. All audience score, this is everybody, you can rate it, 91%. Not much of a difference. We're not seeing a huge difference between verified and all audience, but just wait and see when like the next Star Wars comes out. I think that's where we're going to start seeing discrepancies. All audience score was 91%, 89 out of 100 actual score. So right now we have this sort of split. Critics don't like it that much at all. audiences tend to really, really like this version. Anecdotally, people in my family saw it. They hated the first one. They loved the second one. They thought it was really good. Cinema score was an A minus. Post-track score was a 4.5 out of 5. I've already broken my own rule. That's a 90 out of 100 score. Letterboxd score, very low, 2.8. 56 out of 100 would be that score. So what are we seeing right now from this data point? What story can we tell? One, critics don't like it. The people who did see it really like it. You got the A minus cinema score, the 90 out of 100 post-track score, 92% verified audience score. Letterboxd is sort of like what I consider like film nerds, film Twitter, film snobs, if you will. These are people who really love cinema, and I like their ratings because I think they're just a little bit more honest than general audience in terms of actual quality. So the Letterboxd score for this Secret Life of Pets 2 is very low at a 56 out of 100. But it's directly in line with the original Secret Life of Pets, which was also a 56, or 2.8 out of 5 if you want to be exact on their rating scale. Also 56. Compare it to the other films from the studio, The Grinch last year, also a 56 out of 100. I looked for like the highest rated one from these guys, Despicable Me, the original. That was a 68 out of 100, 3.4 out of 5 stars on Letterboxd. And then I kind of like always like to relate to like what's the theoretical highest score you can get on Letterboxd. It's essentially like Lion King for an animation film, which is 4.3 or an 86 out of 100. So these movies, The Secret Life of Pets 1 and 2, The Grinch, these recent movies they put out are just not good. Like they're not great films. You know, they're scoring in the 50s. As opposed to like the high 70s or 80s, which would be like kind of like a classic, really good film. So they're nowhere near that. Like The Incredibles got like an 82 out of 100 on Letterboxd, which I think is like one of the most revered films, animation films of all time. So overall story here is there's a discrepancy. There's like the people who are really into film, the critics and Letterboxd people don't like it and don't think it's good. The people who have seen it and the general audiences are really liking it. Which is like a split that you tend to see pretty often. How is that going to play out with business? I mean, I think we'll be surprised here. I think that like, I think there's a little bit more clout to the critic score and the Letterboxd score in terms of legs. Now, I'm just throwing that out there anecdotally. I'd have to like study it and look at data. But I do think those scores are more accurate to the actual quality of the movie. As opposed to the verified audience score right now, or the cinema score, or even the post-track score. Cinema score and post-track, opening weekend only, right? Verified audience score, I believe, changes over time, but we don't really know that's going to be in a week or so. But you have this general audience who seems to like it, but like it seems like the actual quality of the film is not that great. But it is a children's film, so where is this thing going to end up? I guess is the big question that I'm asking myself. It's at 47 now, technically 48. If we just do like a quick sort of like, I would say basement on this, because the last film did have a great, like a 3.6 multiplier, which is like with children's films, you got to remember it's not like 2.5 to 3x. It's more like 3x to 3.5x to 4x is the range for a typical multiplier with a children's film. Plus there's tons of kids getting off school, like in the next couple of weeks. It'll play really strong during the weekdays. So I do think 3x is probably the basement for the multiplier on this for Secret Life of Pets 2. So you're probably looking at 144 million, which is obviously way off the 368 million the original made. It's not even close, like not even remotely like half of it. Maybe it legs out a little bit more. Let's look at like maybe a 3.5-ish. Then you're looking at 168. I feel like that feels like a really good range to me. I would suspect it probably meets in the middle, maybe like a 155-ish. I would say 150 to 155 would be my guess for the domestic take on that. But anyway, I would call that, is that a flop, right? It's a pretty extreme underperformance. Studio insiders, according to Deadline, do think it's still going to make a profit. So it's not technically a flop. They didn't spend a ton of money to make it. A lot of that money that they did spend, probably a lot of it was in marketing. You know, the production was only $80 million. This is not a $200 million Marvel movie. But it's really, really underperforming, and I doubt we see a third one of this. And in the write-ups that I'm seeing, especially Deadline kind of notes like, okay, like what's the postmortem here? Why is this opening so much lower? Is it timing? Is the release too early in the summer season? People have said, oh, maybe not everybody's off of school. The data says about 70% of kids are off of school right now, so that doesn't really hold a lot of sway with me in terms of why this is not doing well. The thing that sticks out to me more than anything is just that the original is not beloved at all. The original was just kind of a schlocky kids movie that got pushed on everybody in the middle of summer. There wasn't a lot else out for kids, I don't think, and so it just ended up becoming the default movie that people saw, and they don't really like it all that much. It doesn't have a good legacy to it whatsoever. So, I think the original movie and the sort of the bad taste that it left in a lot of people's mouths, despite tons of people seeing it, is one of the major reasons why this second one is underperforming. And then you also ask the question, and I don't buy this argument whatsoever, is like, why are you making a second one? I mean, Deadline brings that up in their write-up. Like, what's the point of making a second one of these? Sure, you can ask that question all you want, but it's a business, right? Like the original probably made $200 million in profit. It made $368 domestically alone for a production budget that was not anywhere near probably $100 million. So like, there is no reason not to make a sequel, right? That is like, if something you do makes $200 million in profit, you're probably going to copy it and do it again. So I don't really buy the why you making a sequel argument on this one. There's certainly a lot of films where you could do that. Dark Phoenix is a perfect example of the why would you even make this argument. Secret Life of Pets 2, I don't buy that. I don't buy it at all. And I think maybe the culprit here is just sort of taste aversion from like the original not being all that good. And maybe the release date had something to do with it. But I also think the main culprit here, or one of the most significant factors, is that it just seemed like a total retread of the first one. And what I've been saying for the last few weeks is that, like, in order to get people out in the theater these days with all of the other options, especially streaming, like, it's an ordeal to go to the theater, especially with children. So you have to do something special. And I think you can also point to Aladdin a bit, like Aladdin popping off earlier in May. It's in its third weekend now. It's played very strong and it continues to play strong this weekend. And so I think that took a lot of oomph out of the Secret Life of Pets 2 opening here. But I think it's going to play okay here for the next month or so. It's going to have, I think, decent legs. But there's not going to be a third one. Like, this series is now over because of this underperformance. And, it's not that... this one, it's weird. So the original surprised me so much on how well it did because it looked so just shitty. It looked so shoddy. It looks totally uninteresting. And this one, I don't even think I watched the trailer of this one because, like, I don't care. Because the first one looks so terrible. Like, why do I want to watch the repeat of this? But, like... I think that ultimately people just didn't feel the need to go out and see this in the theater. They probably already spent their money on Aladdin. They probably already spent their money on Avengers Endgame. And unless it's like a real spectacle that is exciting and noteworthy, people are just not going to show up. So I think ultimately it's going to be financially, it's going to be a break even for Universal. They're going to be like, okay, this one didn't work out. We're going to break even. Let's find a way to break even on this and just kind of move on. But we will not see another Secret Life of Pets. I can almost bet you $100 million that. Okay. So that's Secret Life of Pets number 1. Number 2, get ready for a downer, folks. We're going to get into the dumps here with Dark Phoenix, the 12th X-Men movie and the last X-Men movie from 21st Century Fox, the Fox studio. So here's the story in Dark Phoenix. I think everybody knew going into this weekend that, like, this had a huge bomb potential. Like, I don't think there's any other film this year that people are like, no, that's going to bomb. Like, there's no way that's going to do well. So everybody sort of saw this coming. The early numbers here for Dark Phoenix, it did take the number 2 slot. It landed in its third weekend. Dark Phoenix took in $33 million for this opening weekend here in 3,721 theaters. Per theater average was $8,000, about $900 per theater there. So where do we even begin with this? So why did we all know that Dark Phoenix is going to flop? Well, one, if you take a look sort of at the history of, and that's what we're going to do really quickly. I'm not going to like go too in depth into it, but let's just take a look at the X-Men movie series and just see how it started and see where it's gone. And I think it's important for a lot of reasons, especially not just box office stuff, but just like film culture and movie culture, cultural history. Remember that X-Men, which came out, the first movie in this series came out in July of 2000, really did kick off the comic book movie craze. It was the one. It was exciting. It was fun. Everybody went to go see it that summer. I remember seeing it opening weekend. I was like, wow, that was like really good. Like, this is not like the comic book movies that I saw in the 90s. Like, there's something special about this. And that led to Spider-Man. That led to MCU and DCEU. And before that, even the Dark Knight series. And like, it really was the spark that lit the huge inferno that is now the comic book movie genre, which essentially owns the box office. And so we can't sort of overlook that. And what's a little bit depressing about the whole thing is like Dark Phoenix is such a shitty movie. It's objectively terrible. And like, if you argue the subjective objective thing, I get it. That's fine. But like, if we can make an argument that if a majority of people think the movie is absolute trash, it's probably not very good. And that's the case with Dark Phoenix. And it's kind of sad to see this whole series end with a movie like this, but it's like, look, it's Fox, it's executive, it's Fox's fault. They should have known, like we all knew, that this was not going to do well. But let's do a little jaunt down memory lane on the X-Men series, just very quickly here. So obviously the first one opened up in July 2000, X-Men. July 14th, opened up at 54, closed out at 157, a fantastic multiplier there. Or I guess a pretty good multiplier for comic book movie. I'm getting a little overboard, I think. In terms of, I'm going to try and do, man, it's probably not going to work for me, but it's tough to talk about these, especially when you're talking like 19 years ago without talking about inflation. But I think I can figure this out here. So, the original X-Men, when you're taking a look at like ticket sales versus the average ticket price and all that kind of stuff, this is what Box Office Mojo does. Is this like perfectly accurate? No, but it's going to give us an idea. So the original opened up, inflation adjusted to 91, closed it at 262. So a great performance overall. Remember, it kind of came out of the blue that it did so well. I don't think Fox was expecting that thing to pop off as much as it did, but it then did kick off the entire comic book movie craze. So then X2 comes out 3 years later in May 2003, opens up at 127 adjusted, closes out at 321. Fantastic performance. And I think X2 is one of the more beloved films in the entire series. I remember seeing it opening weekend, and then people were just like, really excited about it. I think I saw it 2 or 3 times that summer in 2003. Then X-Men, The Last Stand, that comes out and that's, so Bryan Singer did the first 2. I think Brett Ratner did the third one here, X-Men Last Stand, which is considered terrible for most people, but does open up higher than the second one, the biggest opening of the entire series, adjusted, of course. May 2006, it opens up at 141, closes it at 322. Also the highest grossing, well, technically Deadpool is the highest grossing, but of the ensemble movies, X-Men Last Stand is the best performing one in May 2006. 3 years later, so it's like every 3 years they're popping them off. X-Men Origins Wolverine, which is kind of a side movie, I guess you could call, opens up at 102, closes at 217, and this is May 2009. 2 years later, we get X-Men First Class, which I think, is that kind of like a reboot? I can't really remember. I remember seeing that one in theaters. Pretty good. Opens up at 61, closes out at 163. And I think that's the first time we start to realize that, like, oh, the X-Men movie ensemble stuff is not going to keep getting bigger and bigger. It kind of reached its plateau with Last Stand. And then when First Class comes out, you got to remember we're in MCU territory. We're post Dark Knight territory. Like, it's just a very different universe for comic book movies at that point. So First Class doesn't perform all that well. It's an okay performance. Opens up at 61, closes out at 163. 2 years later, we get the Wolverine. Almost identical performance to First Class. In July 2013, the Wolverine opens up at 61, closes out at 152 domestically adjusted. And then a year later, we get another X-Men ensemble movie, X-Men Days of Future Past. Opens up at 98, closes out at 253. These are all, it's funny, like they settled into a nice routine of about a, 60 to $100 million opening, and then kind of having okay legs, but breaking the 150 mark, $200 million mark here. So Days of Future Past, that was in May 2014. Then the big surprise is Deadpool, which I think is one of the biggest surprises of the decade. February 2016 opens up at 139 adjusted, closes out at 381, the best performing X-Men movie of all time. And like, are there other X-Men in the movie? Sort of, yeah, sure, but it's definitely centrally focused on Deadpool, the character. Has a completely different tone than the other movies, very like humor based, almost like a parody of the comic book genre. So I do find it funny that one's the best performer overall. And that, I think, is really the turning point. And I've talked about this a lot on the podcast of the comic book movie genre in general. Like Deadpool and I feel like Logan, both in this series, are big turning points for the comic book movie genre. Deadpool was when you sort of reach the ironic phase of a genre where there's parody, there's a lot of humor, and Logan is sort of like the grown-up version of the adult sort of comic book movie where it's very serious and dealing with very kind of real and authentic human emotion. Not really silly at all, very sort of stoic. Two different paths, like very like almost like a Shakespearean comedy, like with Deadpool, and then Logan's almost like an Oscar movie. Like it's kind of like, we had not really seen a lot of that before in the genre. In any event, Deadpool, surprises everybody in 2016, but then we get X-Men Apocalypse, and to me, this was sort of the canary in the coal mine. And when that was starting to come out, it opened up in May of 2016. It looked so boring. It looked like a complete, like, why are you doing this? Why are you even putting this out? It just didn't look good at all. And it looked, especially compared to what MCU was doing at the time and compared to what had been done earlier that year with Deadpool, only 3 months before this, it looked so stale. And I think Dark Phoenix is an extension of that really tired formula that they tried to do. So X-Men Apocalypse in May 2016 opens up at 67, closes out at 160. And then Logan hits the next year in 2017, March 2017, opens up at 90, closes out at 230. Really great performance. But now you're seeing that like the side films are way outperforming the ensemble movies for a reason, because they have a better story. They're more interesting, and they're just more unique films. Deadpool 2 opened up last year, May 2018 at 120, closed out at 306. Underperformance for the original, but still a strong performance overall. And that brings us now to Dark Phoenix, which is sort of the last gasp of these ensemble X-Men movies. And I sort of called it when X-Men Apocalypse was coming out. I was like, this, why are you doing this? Like, this is the ultimate, like, why would you make this? Because there's no way that X-Men Apocalypse was making a ton of cash for Fox. Like, so financially doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense to keep doing this. And I think the contracts were up on X-Men Apocalypse. I think a lot of them signed up again for Dark Phoenix, and I can't really figure out why. But opening to $33 million, that it's the worst opening in X-Men history by far. It's not even half it's basically half of the lowest record before, which would be X-Men First Class and Wolverine, which both opened up at 61. This is like half of that. And so something's gone dramatically wrong here. And it's pretty easy for me to pinpoint. X-Men is an old series. It's been around forever. We just walked through its entire 19-year history. It had this pedigree and sort of class earlier on in the series. But as time has gone on and the genre has just changed so much, that early incarnation in the comic book movie, which I think X-Men Apocalypse and Dark Phoenix are both guilty of trying to hold on to, just does not work anymore. MCU rules comic book movies. And if you want to be successful outside of the MCU situation, you have to make something like a Deadpool, which is totally different than everything else out there, or something like a Logan, which is also totally different than everything out there in a completely different way. And X-Men Apocalypse and Dark Phoenix didn't do that. And so they're outdated models of the genre, and that's why they're failing. And Dark Phoenix is definitely a sign to anybody in the industry that, like, if you want to do the comic book movie thing, you have to make it special, or you have to be an MCU, because it's like a whole different story. Because, like, look, not all MCU movies are fantastic. Ant-Man and the Wasp was absolutely a terrible movie. It was so boring. I hated it. It wasn't good, but it's still going to make a ton of money because it's in the universe and people will show up to see it. That's not the same with Dark Phoenix. In terms of what critics thought about Dark Phoenix, 22% Rotten Tomatoes, terrible score. Actual score, 46 out of 100 from critics, bad. Verified audience score, 65%. That's one of the lower ones I've ever seen. 73 out of 100 is the actual score. Audience score is 62%, 70 out of 100. So, like, there's, like, critics absolutely hated this movie. Audiences don't like it much either. Cinema score of a B-, post track of 3 stars out of 5, 60 out of 100, if you will. Letterbox of a 2.6 or a 52 out of 100. That's pretty bad. Just to relate it to other X-Men movies, X-Men Apocalypse has a 56 score out of 100. Days of Future Past has a 72 out of 100, which is pretty strong on Letterbox. Letterbox is very, like, the scores are basically like 50 to like 80. And that's kind of the range. Anything that's breaking 80 is like absolutely amazing. And anything that's like below 60 is definitely kind of in the failing range, to give you kind of a perspective. The original X-Men on Letterboxd sits at a 68 out of 100. Captain Marvel at a 70 out of 100. And to kind of like give you a barometer, Endgame, which is one of the highest rated films on there, is at 84. So if you break 80 on Letterboxd, you're looking pretty good. But stuff like Dark Phoenix sitting in the 50s is bad, really bad. And that cinema score for B- is pretty terrible as well. And so, you could say whatever you want about it being a tired version or whatever, but if you don't make a good movie, this thing was like a perfect storm of terrible things. One, you have a really tired formula. Two, you have a set of characters that I don't think people were all that sort of invested in. Three, you have a terrible movie. And four, you're opening it up, about a month and some after the biggest comic book movie of all time. I mean, it didn't make a lot of sense. The production was, plagued with problems. One of the major producers went on Twitter and said I had nothing to do with it this weekend and deleted the tweet. This huge titan of the industry said this. So it's just like, it's one of those movies that people wanted to forget and bury the moment it opened up. And this thing's going nowhere. Like, where's it going to go? $33 million. It's going to be lucky if it makes like $66 million. It'll probably make like $70 million total domestically. Who knows how much this thing costs to make too? It's an X-Men movie. It's a comic book movie. They cost a lot. So I think more than anything here, it's like, and if I'm looking at like the other numbers here and like why this didn't perform well at all, obviously you have the quality issues. Male to female ratio was 58 male, 42 female. That's not that surprising. It's definitely going to over-index on the male audience. But what really kind of shocked me here is the under 35 audience. And usually we break that down to like under 25. This played like really young, way too young to be a big hit. 71% of the audience was under 35. That's a crazy number. That is so far over indexed on young people that it just, nobody over the age of 25 really wanted to see this, essentially. 56% of the audience falling between 18 and 34 years old. So it's just like, the thing about that is, like, usually I say the rule of thumb is if a movie is going to break out, you have to have the under 25, the two quads, males and females under 25. You kind of have to, in order for it to be a 4-quad movie. But just in general, like, it does have to play well with young people because they got disposable income. They spend a lot on movie tickets, blah, 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 right? But in this case, It was kind of the opposite. It's because older people just didn't even bother with Dark Phoenix is the reason why it's failing. And I think that's pretty clear why. It looks like a terrible movie. Compare that. Okay, so like just compare like a marketplace. You have Avengers Endgame, and then you have Dark Phoenix. Which movie would you spend your $15 on to go see? It's a no-brainer. And that's the reality of the market, right? You have limited funds, so you have to make a choice. And people chose to go see Aladdin. They chose to go see Avengers Endgame. They're not going to go see Phoenix. Audience 41% white, 25% Latino, 70% African American, 17% Asian. Over-index on the Asian, under-index on the white folks. And Dark Phoenix played best on the coast, according to Deadline. So there's not much more to say about this performance. It's very bad. It's not really going to go anywhere. It is a really sad end to the X-Men series with Fox. Now that Disney owns them, it sounds like eventually it's going to get a reboot via Disney and Marvel and the MCU here, which I think, in terms of film quality is probably a good thing. I don't like the fact that Disney kind of owns everything right now and they're becoming a monopoly, but like just from the X-Men, if you're a big X-Men fan, I think you're probably very happy that Disney and Marvel is going to take it over completely. But I wouldn't expect that to happen for at least, 2019 now, maybe 2022, 2023. I think it'll be a while before we get another X-Men ensemble movie at all. But just a horrific performance for Dark Phoenix. Okay, so that's the number 2. A lot of time on the 1 and 2. Both very much underperformance, but Dark Phoenix is a pretty extreme flop. Number 3 was Aladdin this weekend, 24.5 million, 42% drop. Great drop. Sitting at 232 now in its third weekend. This one, it just continues to play well, and I think it's one of the reasons why these other film movies are not doing well is Aladdin's just overperforming that much. Again, Disney owns everything. So that was number 3. Number 4 was Godzilla King of Monsters, and its second weekend it did 15.5 million. A 67% drop in its second weekend. This one is like graduating from just like a normal flop to maybe even a massive flop. Because it sits at 78 now. That's just a drop. That's a horror movie drop. Like that's a Freddy versus Jason drop. Like it's just like unheard of for a movie that big to drop that much. Okay, so it's still in 4,000 theaters, and it's not gonna be next weekend. I'll tell you that much. Once the contracts run up, they're gonna get rid of that thing real fast. Speaking of the repercussions of the massive flop of this movie, it sounds like the Kong vs. Godzilla movie that was supposed to come out in March next year is getting pushed. There was some interview at a panel with the guys involved, and they sort of hinted that we may have to, realign our strategy or something and put. It sounds like it's getting pushed to much later, and I think they're just very afraid that like Godzilla's going to lose money. There's no way Godzilla King of Monsters makes money. With that amount of marketing budget and the 170 production budget, which I hear is a lot higher than that, it's going to be a loss for Warner Brothers. So they can't have another loss like that in March of next year. So they're probably going to go back and reshoot a ton of that movie and just rethink how they approach the entire film. But Godzilla's flopping massively. A lot of flops this summer so far. Rocketman, good drop, 45% drop, 14 million, sits at $50 million so far domestically. That's a strong performer. I expect it to have really strong legs throughout all of June. Number 6 was Ma, 7.8 million, 56% drop, very high drop. You can see that in the quality scores, low post-track, low cinema score, low verified audience score on Rotten Tomatoes. People just didn't like it all that much. Sits at $32 million so far domestically, almost 33. Not a bad performance for a $5 million production budget. So Ma's definitely going to make money, but not going to leave a good taste in people's mouth, I don't think, because they didn't really like it all that much. Number 7 was John Wick 3, Parabellum, 7.4 million, a 33% drop. Fantastic drop. It sits at, 138 total so far in its fourth weekend. Huge win for John Wick 3. We're probably going to see another movie in that series as long as Keanu Reeves, they can get him to sign up for some more. Avengers Endgame, 40% drop here. Still ticking away here. 824 million total. Won't break the domestic record. And now it seems like it's not going to break the worldwide record, which I was almost certain that it was going to do, and it looked like it was going to do. What is it at now? 2.73. What the hell was it's not going to make, it's only $50 million off. Why can't they just like re-release it? Like take it out of theaters for a month and say, hey, by the way, we want to put this back out. Let's do it again. Let's do it again in July. It needs $50 million. Come on. They have got to be able to do this. If that doesn't break the Avatar record, that's absurd. Like, just start releasing it in random countries that it's not in yet and just make that money. Disney's got to be smarter. They got to beat Fox here. I guess, like, they don't care because they own Fox now. Obviously, the studio that put out Avatar. Okay, so Endgame's doing quite well still. Pokemon, Detective Pikachu, heavy drop here. 57% drop. 2.9 million for the weekend. Totals at 137. Again, I've gone back and forth in this movie and how its performance. I don't think it's performing all that well. 150 production budget, 409 worldwide. I mean, it's probably going to take in what? 409, you're looking at like maybe 86% revenue. That production budget's way too high. I just feel like it's a break-even situation for Warner Brothers on that. Tough week for Warner Brothers. Godzilla and all that stuff. So, okay. And to finish at the top 10, my favorite movie that I love to rant about, Booksmart, 1.5 million, a 52% drop. Way too high for a movie like this. What did I tell you? It lost 1,384 theaters this weekend. There's usually a 2-week contract. Got to play it for 2 weeks, then you can get rid of it. That's what happened with this one. So it still sits in 1,100 theaters, but like per theater average is anemic at 1,400 in its third weekend. It's at $17 million so far. I'm just telling you, like, it's been a huge conversation on Twitter and like in the industry in general. There's been Variety, New York Times wrote about it. Like, it's been a big, LA Times wrote about it. It's been a big story. It's on a performance. And I think that like, talked a lot about it and why it happened. And this is a good sort of dovetail into the other limited releases that are out. Now, Booksmart went wide. A movie like Late Night from Amazon Studios, which had tons of buzz. I mean, ecstatic buzz from Sundance earlier this year in January. That opened up in 4 theaters this weekend. Did $250K, because it doesn't matter. The per theater average is what matters. This is the very typical platform release. I guarantee you it played at the ArcLight in Los Angeles as one of the theaters, and probably the Angelica, or what the hell it's called, in New York City. Almost guarantee it's played in those 2 places. Per theater average, just sort of to gauge it, anything over 40K per theater is pretty good in a 4 theater platform release. Anything above that, once you start getting towards the 80, 100K, very like potential to pop off, but not necessarily going to. Steve Jobs is a perfect example of a movie that popped off in platform release over 100K per theater, went on to completely flop on wide release. So it's not a sure thing, but it definitely is a very good sign that it could break out with wider general audiences. So Late Night came in at 62K per theater, which is very, very strong. And it's not kind of like, whereas Steve Jobs felt very much a New York, LA movie, Late Night does to a little to some degree, but I feel like there's a lot more wide appeal to it. So that's an awesome opening from Late Night. Here's the thing, right? Like, now the story is like, keep in mind, Amazon Studios was going to release this wide this weekend. It was supposed to go wide June 7th in probably like 1,500 theaters or something like that. Amazon pulled back. Now, there was an interview in Variety, a Hollywood Reporter this week, where the producer was like, oh, we're not pulling back because of Booksmart, but they're pulling back because of Booksmart. They saw the mistake that Booksmart was. They thought Late Night, oh, we can play this wide, it's going to do really well. No, that's not how it works. It's not going to work that way. Like, Late Night needs to have really strong word of mouth for at least the next 2 weeks before you want to push it out to like 2,000 theaters. It may never hit 2,000 theaters, and maybe it doesn't even have to. As long as you keep it, performing strong week in and week out, that word of mouth can grow. But like, essentially, Booksmart was like a supernova, just like imploded on release. Whereas Late Night now, for the next week, we're going to see constantly articles from LA Times, New York Times, Hollywood Reporter, Variety, Deadline. They're always like, oh man, look at this performance from Late Night. And it's going to spread on Twitter, spread on social media and Facebook and Instagram, and that creates word of mouth. So when this thing starts getting bigger and starts going to more theaters, people are like, oh yeah, I heard about Late Night. It's supposed to be really good. And that's the thought that gets stuck into people's heads. Unless you do that for a movie like this, it's not going to perform super well on a opening weekend wide release. It's not going to happen. So I think Late Night has positioned itself, and Amazon has positioned itself very well for this movie to do well over the next few weeks. I don't know what the expansion looks like right now. Maybe we'll see that on the release schedule in a bit, but I think this is a really good start. Also a pretty decent start here, Last Black Man in San Francisco, which I've been hearing really great things about. This is from A24. Opened up in 7 theaters, obviously probably in San Francisco. It did $32K per theater, which is good. Not a bad performance, but this one probably not going to break out. It just doesn't have, I don't think it's kind of an Oscar movie. It's kind of an Oscar season movie, not really a summer movie, and I think it's going to do okay. But 32 is pretty strong, I will say that. But I think Late Night has a little bit more, or much more of a chance of breaking out. Is it going to break out? I have my doubts. Despite this performance, despite Amazon sort of coming to their senses and saying, hey, we can't push this out wide right now. We got to wait. We got to build this up. Learn from Booksmart's failure. I still have some doubt that that's really going to kind of pop off like a Big Sick did. You know, make $40 million domestically. I don't see it happening, but I could be wrong there. Okay, so that is the top 10 with some little sprinkles of limited release analysis here. Anything else? Pavarotti also came out. That didn't do very well. The documentary from Ron Howard, who was all over some news show this week, so that's why I know that one. Anything else limited? No. So we'll keep an eye on Late Night and Last Black Man in San Francisco. Booksmart's dead. I told you it was DOA, folks. It's gone. It's not going to be here next weekend, I don't think. It's out of the top 10. Per theater average will drop below 1,000 per theater. And maybe, where does it end its run? I don't know. $22 million bucks. Which maybe that's what they wanted. I don't know. But I'm telling you that Booksmart could have been a $50 million domestic movie. Not easily, if they played their cards right and did the right strategy. And the film quality was there. But that's what happens when you don't have the right strategy. You make $20 million bucks instead of 50. Okay. Enough of that. Let's talk a little bit about what's coming out to close out the show. Or just like a brief recap of like the top 10 and what was going on, like the headline stories. Aladdin continues to play strong. One of the better performers of the summer so far. John Wick's a winner. Avengers Endgame's a winner. Rocketman's doing quite well. Pokemon's kind of a push. The good performance for what it was, without a doubt. But we do have two massive flops so far this summer. Godzilla King of the Monsters is a massive flop, and so is Dark Phoenix. Dark Phoenix wasn't a surprise. Godzilla to me was a little bit of a surprise how poorly it's doing. Secret Life of Pets is essentially a push to a small profit. Pretty extreme underperformance from the original though, so we won't see a third one. Those are your headlines. In terms of what's coming out next weekend, it's getting really fascinating, folks. This is like my favorite. This is one of my favorite summers in a long time because it just feels like it really brings me back to the 90s for some reason. The Men in Black International coming out next weekend. It's tracking in like the 20s, which doesn't make any sense. I have no idea how that's going to do. I couldn't even guess. It's opening up at 3,800 theaters. I don't know. I feel like it's going to do better than people are thinking. I would say more like a 40-ish opening seems about right to me. But I don't know what the cachet of Men in Black is for people under like 30. I have no idea if they remember the films or they love the film. They really, it's something that we're not going to see. The nostalgia for them. I don't know. So we'll see that one plays out. It's really kind of a wild card. I think Shaft's going to break out. Shaft's coming out in 2,900 theaters plus from Warner Brothers New Line. Something feels right about that movie right now. It seems very different than the other stuff out there. Samuel Jackson's 70 years old. How is that even possible? It'll be a sort of passing of the torch in that series. I do think Shaft's going to do quite well. What does that mean? I think 30s is really respectable and good for a movie like that. I think it might be neck and neck between Men in Black and Shaft next weekend. Obviously, none of the holdovers are going to get in that $30-40 million range. Late Night is expanding wide next week into 1,500 theaters. That seems a little bit too early for me to open that up. Also coming out is The Dead Don't Die. Jim Jarmusch the zombie movie. Jarmusch. I can't say anybody's name. Don't listen to me. Obviously like a film legend. He's never really had a movie open big though. So like this is his biggest opening of all time. Is that going to do well? Focus features? I don't know. The nerds will go see it. Film Twitter will go see it. I don't think anybody else will though. So really interesting weekend next weekend with Men in Black, Shaft, Late Night, and the Dead Don't Die. Then we're getting into like later June here. Anna from Lionsgate, Child's Play, Toy Story 4. I keep forgetting that's coming out. Wild Rose. Well, forget about Life of Pets 2 having good legs. Toy Story 4 is coming out. Wild Rose is from Neon. Kind of small release. I don't know much about Anna at all. Helen Mirren, Luke Evans, Killian Murphy. I got nothing on that one. Child's Play, United Artists Releasing, who did Booksmart. I don't know then. Like, do they have the right plan in place? Do they know what's going on? Which is also Annapurna, essentially. I don't think Child Play is... I think Child Play is gonna flop. I feel like Men in Black and Shaft are gonna overperform, and I feel like the Child's Play is gonna underperform. Toy Story, I think, is gonna surprise people. I'm like, I don't know, maybe I'm negative on Toy Story. I went to go see Toy Story 3 2009 opening weekend, I think. And I think there was Toy Story 3, yeah. And like people were so overwrought when that movie came out. And like, oh, it's like the end of my childhood. And I was like, well, the end of my childhood. It was just like I just didn't enjoy the experience. I didn't think it was the masterpiece that people were claiming. And I kind of wonder how this one's going to perform. What are we talking about? $100 million opening? What is this thing tracking at? Probably in that range, 100 to 140, somewhere in there. We'll see though. I could be totally wrong. I get the sense though, I'm sensing something that it might underperform. Not flop. It's not going to flop. There's no way Toy Story 4 flops. But I feel like there might be a little bit of underperformance there. So that's June 21st. June 28th. Well, we have a couple of them. June 26th, you have Annabelle Comes Home. June 28th, you have Yesterday, the Danny Boyle Beatles movie, which could be a surprise hit. I just feel like a lot of people know that about that movie. Could do quite well. Annabelle Comes Home from Warner Brothers New Line. Why are we doing another Annabelle movie? I guess the other ones are, they all do well. The Conjuring universe is just kind of amazing when you think about it. I have no idea what that one's going to do though. I don't think we need another Annabelle movie. I think we need another cool character in that universe to have a movie about, not another Annabelle movie. Spider-Man then on the July 3rd. Midsommar. I mean, what is Midsommar going to do? I have no idea. Crawl horror movie. Oh, that looks really fun. I'm calling this right now. Crawl's going to break out July 12th. Paramount. It's the crocodile alligator movie. Looks really fun. Looks like a very low rent midsummer horror movie. That I might go see in the theater. And then of course Lion King comes out later in July. Really interesting June here. Next weekend I think it's going to be a lot of fun. Then we got Toy Story. It kind of closes out pretty quiet though, but then we got July 4th around the corner. All right, that's all folks. This has been the Wildline Podcast. I will be back next weekend. Thanks.